Hello and welcome. My name is Trismegistus and today we're going to be reading through and speculating about the latest Factorio Friday Facts. Friday Facts 379 Abstract Rewiring. This is posted by Boskid, Strangepan and Cloned. Let me show you around. That's our lab table and this is our work stall. And over there is our interplanetary space platform. And here's where we keep assorted lengths of wire. Whoa, a real live space platform. We designed it ourselves. Let us show you some of the different lengths of wire we used. Electric Pole Improvements by Boskid. This will be more of a technical journey, a peek behind the scenes of what we have to consider when adding features, and it will be wired to one of our features I had to refactor in order to allow more features, manual ghost wires. The technical starting point. Traces of the first implementation of copper wires can be seen in Factorio versions as old as 0.2.10 from 2013, and they actually survived up to 1.0 from 2020. Copper connections between electric poles were just a targeter pointing at another electric pole saying, "I am connected to this electric pole." We then got a picture, the caption of which is the simple case, poles pointing to its neighbours. And obviously this is just two power poles, medium power poles, and it's showing that wire connections go either way in terms of the logic of the game. Obviously there aren't actually two wire connections, it is just a single wire, but it's the game saying I'm connected to this one, I'm connected to this one. To be more precise, each electric pole has exactly 5 of these targeters, as a static vector is more optimal than a dynamic one. Optimal, I assume, means from the performance point of view. So this diagram is Factorio 1.0, and it says electric poles in Factorio 1.0, copper wires between electric poles were not possible between electric pole ghosts. And as you can see here, we've got a ghost power pole, and there's no interconnecting wire, no ghost connecting wire. When an electric pole would be destroyed, all copper wires to other electric poles had to be disconnected because we can't pretend that the entity hidden in the entity ghost shell is still connected to the network. And we've got another picture here, caption of which is real pole can't have a direct normal connection to the one inside a ghost, as the logic related to connection would get confused. So basically a ghost, which is just being highlighted here, it's not actually showing a ghost, but think of this as a ghost, and it's saying that any ghost in the old code couldn't have a connection to a real item. To be able to have wire connections in blueprints, both normal and circuit, we had to add a special one-sided connection from ghost to real entity. Special data structures for ghosts to keep track of entities it's connected to. Featured in Friday Facts 362 and released in 1.1. So next picture is just showing that with the entity ghost now having a special connection to the real item. That's in contrast with the previous picture where it showed that the proper connections couldn't be allowed. So in order to show a ghost wire, there's a special ghost connection. So the next picture has the caption, if both were ghosts, they used this special connection bidirectionally. So now you have to imagine you've got 2 ghosts in a row. Again, these aren't actual ghost images, they're real ones. But if you imagine that's the ghost, and the wires that you would see connected between ghosts would be this special connection going both ways. So it's not quite the same, or it's a different thing compared to the situation here where you've got proper wire connections going both ways. Even if you sort of sit and think about that for a minute, that's a bit weird, and that's what they sort of get on. That's the point they're getting onto. This looked like a nice solution in the beginning because we glued a new possibility to the ghost without disturbing the basic electric pole functionality. In other words, electric pole logic didn't have to know anything about ghosts and its related logic. But in reality, this solution already started to smell, as the special cases were starting to pile up. 1. When an electric pole is destroyed, you need to check if a ghost is pointing to it or not, and update its connection to the containing new ghost instead. 2. When an electric pole is revived, you also need to update the corresponding neighbouring ghosts in terms of the connections. When a blueprint is being used, the wires for the blueprint need to be collected from entities and ghosts. 4. In any logic which needs to check if 2 things are connected, regardless of ghost or real connection, we need to check all the possible ways the connection could exist. This applies to wire dragging, automated connections, pole removal, reconnections, and such. And this is just the start, because we are just considering electric poles. We also have power switches. The switch plus pole connection was also done in a custom way, which didn't have the 5 connection limit. So this is then shown in this next picture, which has the caption, abusing power switch to have 6 electric pole connections. This electric pole has 5 possible connections allowed in theory to other power poles, but by connecting to a switch and then connecting that switch to a power pole, you've magicked up a 6th connection. So the amount of places where the connections are stored and the combination in which they interact was just a programming nightmare. And the main reason why there were always some special corner cases where wires worked differently. Similar limitations also applied to circuit wires. Circuit connectors were only able to store connections to other real circuit connectors, so when a ghost was destroyed, it would be a single direction connection only. This means that the special logic related to circuit wires and their handling was also bloated by all of this. The breaking point. At this point, I was asked by Coverets to make it possible to add wires to ghost poles manually. After a day of not being able to reliably tell which functions to call to just add a ghost wire, I decided the amount of technical debt was just too much. A refactoring was imminent. I just had to throw everything out the window and propose a completely new design that would solve all the issues reliably in one go. So just to explain that slightly, the intention was to be able to add wires to ghosts. So you've got a ghost and you can use the functionality of basically manually connecting wires, and it applies to a ghost. So effectively a ghost connecting to ghost power poles is what it's saying, I believe. The point was in the code and how it had been written, it was just really, really complicated because they were having to work around all those edge cases. The realisation. It started to be obvious that the original rule to never point into dead entities inside ghosts by anything was not worth the complications. Once we started to discover the possible simplifications we could do by breaking this rule, it was more and more obvious that this is the way to go. It turned out that the thing we were afraid of all along, to alter the electric network pole connection logic to not get confused when ghosts are included in the normal connection system, was basically just ifs, a few ifs. So to explain that slightly, by a few ifs, they mean if-then type statements. So if you're unfamiliar with writing code at all, one of the main mechanics of writing code really is like Boolean logic decisions. So how an if statement works is you go if, and then there's a check condition, and if that check is true, then you would have a then statement and it would do something. Now if that check is false, the code may not just do anything and it just moves on to the next statement. But you can also then have an else statement that says do this instead. And typically a lot of the things you would check in ifs are actually numerical or things like that, where this example where it's saying if there's a wire, if it's a ghost, basically don't connect to it. That's the type of thing you might have in the code. Or if it's a ghost, then ghost connect to it. The reason being that you can't have power flowing through ghost wires, and you don't want your power connection logic to be that complicated because it's going to be checked all the time. So if you have a very simple rule that says, right, if it's a ghost, it's not connected to the power system, then you achieve that aim. And so that's why they ended up with these two special conditions, two special types, because your first connection type is a real connection, a real wire down which power flows, and the second type was a ghost connection. And so the code can come along and just basically check, is it a real connection? Then I'm connected to it. If it's a ghost connection, just ignore it. And of course that second one, it may not even properly check. It just checks, is it real? And then it moves on if it's not real. And so that's what they were doing before. And this is, it's sort of a different way of achieving the same sort of thing. In other words, we built a whole infrastructure to shield this logic from change, while the infrastructure was so overwhelmingly more complicated than just changing the original logic. We thought it was a good programming design, but it led us down the wrong path. The unification. And since everything could connect the same way, real, in ghost, power switch, circuit wires, etc., we could encapsulate all the related connection logic into a single wire connector class and make everything stupidly simple compared to how it was. So we have here another picture. With all the changes, set up like this is no longer deemed impossible. There are also some interactions that could be improved even a little. When dragging an electric pole with circuit wires, it will drag those as well. So there's a little video here just showing that as a demonstration. Essentially they're taking a wooden power pole and dragging out there and dragging around the bottom. Now normally that wouldn't connect the green and red wires, and now it can because it's using the same logic system, so it's basically just drawing the green and red wires where it would also draw the normal copper wire. That's going to be a huge quality of life improvement for those that do those. You used to have to sort of mess about a lot with copying and pasting or using blueprints and things like that, whereas now you can just drag the wires around. and it's improved even further by another point that's made later on. Also, the circuit rewiring logic could simply be done the same way as normal wire rewiring. Yes, so this video then shows that in action, where they're taking 2 power poles out, and it's automatically reconnecting the red and green wire. It wouldn't normally do that. You would have to manually add those back in, or use, as I say, blueprints or something like that, copy and paste. So this is another really nice little quality of life feature. Not game-changing stuff, but, you know, a nice little touch. The closure. And finally, after 2 weeks of refactoring, I sat down and finished the original task to allow players to manually connect electric poles even in the ghost form. It took me just a few minutes. Where are my wires? By Strangepan. Speaking of wires, we noticed a few oddities with how the game was drawing them. Once I saw these problems, I couldn't unsee them. Wires connecting 2 short entities over a long distance, such as inserters or chests, were sagging way lower than they realistically should. And what's with those shadows? Why are they sagging south while all of the other shadows stretch towards the east? That's not how physics works. Combined, these make wires feel out of place in the game world and appear pasted onto the screen. Let's fix that. While the game is 2D, we do have some hint about the relative heights of the wire connections, which is the relationship between the connection point and the shadow connection point. Using these 2 offsets from the Lua definition, we can estimate the maximum wire sag that should be present. So I got them one of these nice slidey pictures. To better communicate a wire's position, circuit wires strung between 2 short entities now only sag until they would touch the ground. So the points they're making here are quite well illustrated by this. This is the original, or the current version of Factorio. You notice how the wires here are really sagging very low, and low enough that it's potentially looks like it's probably going below the land. And particularly here, if that's the level of the ground, then this is somehow both slightly below the ground. It looks like maybe it's sort of lower than it should be. The point here is that this wire, this wire is now only dripping the maximum amount it could based on the height of the machine, and it's essentially resting on the floor. The other point with the shadows, but it always looked to me like they just took the wires, you know, the pattern that it formed, and like offset it slightly. And the offset is like down more than it is to the right. It's just, it always gave that impression that it's basically you take the image and you offset it and you call it a shadow. Whereas this is actually roughly calculating the actual direction. And of course the sun in Factorio is always in the west. So all the shadows are always just projected directly to the right, or the east, I guess. And so the wire shadows now do that properly. It's a really good example of what it is. It's a heck of an explanation when you can really just see it by comparing the 2. In the next picture we see wire shadows now sag towards the sun. They feel natural and less out of place when viewed alongside other shadows. Together, these 2 changes give the wires a better, more consistent illusion of height and space within the game world. So this is the original Factorio, and this is the new Factorio, or version 2 Factorio when we see this. And as I say, if you look at those lines in this version, and I say it's not quite like that, but doesn't it just look like they've taken that, you know, thing, and this is what they were saying about pasted on, but they've taken that shape, you know, made it a shadow, so made it like an opaque, a semi-opaque, you know, picture, and just moved it over. So that curve is exactly that curve, and that curve is exactly that curve, and that straight line is that straight line. But of course, in the actual real world, that would be sagging. That line there would sag, and so it would have a curve. That line there would sag, so it would have a curve. These are going east-west, so the sun would just shine straight on them as a straight line. So it's a lot more realistic. It's not entirely real, but it's a heck of a lot closer. Well, we'll come back to this. If you notice, the shadow just draws straight across, which is weird. This here always just looked like, let's bung a shadow in, and it's just drawn on, whereas this actually looks like it's calculating a shadow. I'm sure it was calculating in both cases, but yeah. Long-distance connections between combinators should be more readable at a glance. So because of the improvement, this comparison picture is showing this is the original set of connection wires. And look, this even shows it even better. You know, this speaker has its connection points right on the floor. So how is this hanging down like this? How is it so low, given that these are quite low as well? It's just, it almost looks like it's like, you know, pointing out like it's a wire wafting in the breeze somehow. So that's an even better example, I think, of the, you know, that weird it's below the surface thing. And I say, then it's got shadow that's somehow below the surfaces as well. Whereas now we've got, that's, if it's not on the floor, then it's almost on the floor. Do you see what I mean? So it's a lot more realistic. In terms of it's more easy to read, slightly, I would say. I'm not sure it's quite that dramatic. Once you see the improvement, it's hard to go back without noticing the flaws. Pop quiz, can you spot the shadow problem I want to fix next? So this is comparison of a load of inserters connected to a medium power pole. This is what we get at the moment. This is what we get in the future. And you say it does look a lot more realistic. Tiny inconsistencies in a video game's graphics, UI design, controls, etc. can taint the experience, even if most players can't articulate exactly why. Most players will never notice the changes made to wires, yet all of them will see wires eventually and unconsciously enjoy the benefits. Taking a moment from time to time to improve even the smallest of details can go a long way towards making a good game feel great. As a bonus, we can also close some of the historic bug reports on the topic. Abstract items by Cloner. Most items in Factorio are nice and normal. You use them as ingredients, you use them to build machines and walls. Some of them you even eat to recover your health. It's simple, it makes sense. But over time, some new features were introduced that had some unique and specific actions, and items were the natural way for the player to discover and use them. Some examples. 1. Blueprints and deconstruction planners. 2. Red and green wires. 3. Discharge defense remote. 4. Artillery remote. 5. Spidertron remote. These were real items that you needed to craft to use. They took up inventory space, you lost them when you died, etc. You might be a little surprised to learn that when blueprints were first added, you had to craft them with an advanced circuit, and to erase them cost an electric circuit. I remember those days. I used to play the game back then. I don't remember the electric circuit to erase them, but it's so long ago. I mean, I'm not saying it's not true, but I don't remember that. But I remember having to have advanced circuits to make them, because it was an absolute pain in the bum. Because advanced circuits are hugely costly when you think about how many blueprints you use and don't use. And I remember entire games where I was basically like saving up all the blueprints. And the thought, I mean, you imagine the amount of copy pasting, which is blueprinting, that you do, and you'd need a red circuit to do all of those. It just ate through at red circuits like you wouldn't believe. Over time, we came to decide that having everything as real items was not always the best gameplay-wise. And with the introduction of the blueprint library, blueprints became the first abstract item. This means that you can just spawn one in when you need it, and you can store them in the library so they don't take precious inventory space, but you can still put them on your quick bar for convenient access. I remember all that as well. There was quite a technical Friday Facts as well, talking about the options for how they were managing blueprints. Again, the other part to this is, I remember like sticking them in chests and storing blueprints and all that sort of thing. Particularly, blueprint books came in a lot later than blueprints, so you would have 20 blueprints, and that was your entire inventory. It was not an ideal solution, and they kind of had to introduce some kind of library system, because that just lets you store them like a chest, an infinite chest. Weird tricks and remote interactions. Blueprints were the major one, but it left the rest of these types of items in a strange place. The strangest and most annoying was the red and green wires. It took good, hard, well-earned copper and iron to craft them, but if you unwire something, you get nothing back. Additionally, if you used a blueprint, the red and green wires were included for free. The aspect of remote interaction also started to become strange. You cannot red wire something up from the map, but you could take a blueprint of it, wire it locally, then place the blueprint back over the top, and the wires would magically change. That's just frustrating and annoying. In the end, we took the path that made a lot of sense, which is to turn these all into abstract items, which you can spawn for free. And the abstract items work from any distance. This also applies to the copper cable. There is the real copper cable used for recipes, and the abstract one used to connect electric poles. The new abstract items naturally tie into the shortcut bar system, which is being used to its full potential. Okay, so we got another picture here from the game, and it says you might also notice that the shortcut bar can now be up to 12 slots wide. And as it shows there, we've got a load of slots here. These are the standard ones, and the new ones are these ones here, where the shortcut bar, which is different to your tool belts, so that's the one that's currently like double height on the right. Well, you can change the position of it actually, but on the right, and it's got like, is it 4 and 4? I think so. It's 8. at the moment, and we're adding on here new icons that show, right, if you're wanting to add a copper wire, a green wire, a red wire, use your artillery, or this is the discharge remote. It's not some sneaky Easter egg to show us, it's just the discharge remote. Who uses them? Or use one of your Spidertrons, remotely. Then you've got buttons that allow you to do that. So they've become abstract items. It's the point. These are not going to clog up your inventory, but they're now don't have a cost. So basically, you can just spawn as many Spidertron remotes as you want, rather than, because they were quite expensive to build. But yeah, and as part of that, we're seeing that to just create an artillery targeting remote, we just have to Alt-T. So we don't have to build an artillery remote anymore. These changes also improve the ability to do things remotely, and remote interactions will be a focus of the next Friday Facts. As always, connect some wires between your fingers and the table to let us know what you think. I think the thing that's wrong, and this is my guess, is the shadow passing over the power pole here and here. So that wouldn't happen basically like that, because that is not on a plane. That is not flat compared to that. It would draw some kind of line there. You wouldn't get any shadow on this back part because that's in shadow. So the shadow there would probably be a lot higher up actually, and it would go in a different direction. I think it would go up because of what in fact it'd probably be there, and that's where the shadow would be, because that's how projection works. I suspect that's the one, and you see it because it overlaps there and overlaps there and overlaps in weird ways there. The other thing I thought might be the shadow, might be the point, is some of these double up in weird ways. So, the shadow here has kind of a strange doubling up in it, and not doubling up, if that makes sense. So the shadows don't seem to sort of overlap properly. I don't think it's that, but I think it's this lines being drawn across. Welcome comments and guesses in the chat. What do you think? I mean, that's obviously been there forever, just drawing it over the top. But yeah, increasing the 3D-ness by having it underneath or, get where it should be would be another one of these subtle changes. What tends to happen when you're coding things, essentially, is there's a question of whether you kind of go in and design or redesign what you're doing, or the area of the code that you're in order to make it more generic, make it more modular, make it more useful for future implementations, or if you just bolt something on to get it done quickly. It's a tricky situation often when you are coding, because the time factor between the two, it has to be weighed up, because getting a solution done quickly is obviously gets that problem solved quickly, but you could just be stacking up what they call technical debt, which is all of the hacked together jobs and quick fixes that someone else, when they're coming in to make another change, has then got to work around. And so then you get to the question, well, at what point do you say, right, let's just have a clean slate, redesign it all, and start from fresh, and try and build it so that it's much more usable, modular, etc., etc. So this is what they're really getting at. And as I said at the start, it's really an example of how they've been doing the refactoring. And yeah, this is just to know, this is what I'm talking about the refactoring. And do you just botch things together all the time, or do you completely rewrite the code? So taking 2 weeks to refactor the whole thing, it's not achieved anything different to what was already there. Maybe some tweaks and say things like allowing more connections, so it is slightly different, but basically it's the same functionality. It's just they've spent 2 weeks rewriting it, and because of the rewrite, it then just takes minutes to add in that original change. And the point essentially was that it got to such a point where it'd probably take 4 weeks or something, or 3 weeks or 2.5 weeks or something, to add in that change by botching it together. And then whoever came along to do another change would have to spend like 4 weeks doing it. So this is what we talk about by technical debt, that basically you're storing up problems for later. And sometimes it won't matter because you won't need to rewrite it. You'll never change wires or what have you. But sometimes it does. And I say this is why I think possibly, although also because of the position Wooby is in with the success of the game, they can kind of afford to do this sort of thing. Probably in a normal game, you'd only really do this if it was like, it turned out that this was a massive resource hog and you were like, we have to do this, otherwise it's causing terrible performance problems. Tweaking the wires so that it's, just a bit better is a little bit of a luxury, if I'm honest, with a lot of projects. I don't know if this is a little bit of a stealth drop of an improvement. Basically, this wire now has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 power connections and 1 connection to a switch. So I don't know if that means that we now have every power pole is able to be connected to multiple things, because this is only one side. So in theory, we could have, what would that be, 17 or something connection? No, 15 connections to a single wire. Is that what they're saying? Or is this like a high quality wire, a high quality power pole, and it gets more connections? Because I think it said in the quality one, I've not checked, but I think it said that it was basically longer connections, so an extra range of connection. It didn't mention having more connections, but I might be wrong. This could be a super high quality wire. So just to discuss about the wires thing and the remote interactions. I think this is a little bit of a hint that this is really coming in for the space platforms and potentially other planets. It sounds like basically if you've forgotten to wire something up, or you want to change a wire, meaning especially circuit network wires on another planet, then we're going to have some kind of mechanism, I believe, to be able to look at that remote planet. Some sort of improvement to radars, to look at that remote planet and make those changes from our inventory, without it giving the badert noise and telling us it's too far away. That's basically, I think, why this introduction is coming in. And there is that workaround of you copy a thing, you paste it down. I mean, they say blueprints, but you can just copy and paste. Then you can make the edit and then you copy and paste it back, which is just bizarre. And obviously a lot of faffing around and pain. And in particular, if you think about this in terms of what if there are items or buildings that we can only build on the particular planets? If there's some mechanism for extracting fluids from a particular type of planet, we may be restricted to only building those on the planet. So how would you do that? You would have to copy and paste it where? You'd have to do it in a blueprint, and unless we're getting edits to blueprints, which I suspect we might be, I think we're getting an improved blueprint system. But you can't really edit things properly in blueprints currently in Factorio. You can delete stuff out of them, so you could do that, but if you wanted to add a red wire on a blueprint, you can't do that without doing that copy and paste trick. And if you can't copy and paste a machine because it's limited to that machine, it means you've got to go all the way to that planet just maybe to fix a tiny little error. And especially if you think about trains and all of that sort of stuff that we know are going to get an improvement, and I'll come back to that later on. To me, this is all hinting at improvements that really make the other stuff work. Obviously, they are improvements I assume we're getting in the base game as well for every player, so they'll make everybody's life easier. But really, I think these are pointing towards things that are tweaks they're making in order to make the expansion more playable. I don't know if that last bit means that we're going to get some information on space platforms and other planets. I suspect not. I think they're kind of holding back a little bit now. They've given us some really big things, and maybe we'll get a tranche now of more sort of quality of life type improvements, and that are build ones. So they build up a basis of, right, well, these are all the changes we've made, and they let you do planets, and here are what the planets look like. So I don't think we'll get it next week, but I think this is why it's being done, really, because those remote interactions, doing them on distant planets and space platforms and stuff, is why they've made this change. Okay, I did just want to pick up a thing that basically all the videos that I watched, nobody spotted. Everyone got really excited about the accumulators. This isn't a thing. I don't think this is a new thing. I don't think power is transferred by the rails. I think this is just basically spawned in from the editor in order to power this radar. The point I made in my video was, I don't know why you would need a radar then. The bit that everybody's not spotted, and I watched quite a few of the videos, getting everybody's excitement about the new Friday Facts, is watch this train, okay? No, watch this train, sorry. Did you see that? So this one does it as well. Okay, so it'll spawn back in, because this is a loop video, and it'll just, pop back in, and it'll go back to the beginning of the video. So here they are, they're both blue. This one sets off and becomes orange. This one sets off and becomes, what would you call that, white or grey? Okay, so what's going on? Basically, there is some big change to the way trains work, and we kind of knew they were expressing that there would be, and they did make the point in this Friday Facts that giving us elevated rails is about giving us more throughput and things like that, because rail is going to be really complicated, when you're going multi-planet, big factory, etc., etc. So it's a little difficult to interpret what's going on, but in terms of what the actual change is. But you notice these are all blue, and it's like when they're sat at this train depot that is dropping off copper, raw copper, or picking up processed copper, because this one's dropping off raw copper, this one's picking up processed copper, copper plate, and so they've both got blue when they're coming here, right? Once they're going to wherever they're going, then they change to the color of the station they're going to, I think, which means you can basically set all of your copper stations, your copper ore pickup, which is white in this case, to be white stations, and have them be common. And so any train that's going to a raw copper outpost will pick up the white color. This is obviously then taking copper to a drop-off point, say circuits or what have you. The drop-off stations for processed copper ore must be orange, and that's how it's being done. Basically, it's saying, right, this train is now full of copper, off it goes to a station that is dropping off copper plate, and so it changes to the colour of that drop-off, so that you can then see at a glance, right, well, these trains are all going to my various copper stations, these are going to my copper ore stations. But yeah, no one kind of spotted that. It was pointed out in a few of the comments, and I think it's discussed on Reddit as well. But this is a real thing. It's not just that a coincidence of the editing or something like that. This is a real system in the game, new system in the game. And this was meant to be the Easter egg, and everyone got really excited about the accumulators, when really it's the fact that the trains are changing colour. I hope you enjoyed today's Friday Facts video and might consider coming back for another one. If you want to chat about the latest Friday Facts, then you can find me live streaming Factorio every Saturday over on my Twitch channel @TrisMagistus. Thanks for watching. Cheers. I could do it without a burp.